Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today's topic is actually the third and final chapter in the Dark Lord Morgoth series. So when I first began this in response to a comment or question, I thought, one long video, I gloss over a few things, that'll probably do it. Quickly realized, nope, that's not going to work. Last week, when I started to do the second video, I thought I could probably finish this in a second video. Quickly realized, nope, not going to do it. So today, I have every reason to believe I can finish the topic of Morgoth in this third video. But yeah, I mean, he's just, he's so involved, intertwined with so much of Tolkien's mythology that he warrants 3 videos. So there you go, Morgoth. When last we left off with Morgoth, we are in the First Age, the year 60. There is the glorious battle, Dagor Aglareb. It's the biggest defeat for Morgoth to date, and it results in the beginning of the siege of Angband. And that siege lasts for about 400 years. So he has a lot of time to sit and think. During that time, he starts thinking, I need more than orcs and balrogs if I'm going to take on these pesky elves. And so the end result is Glaurung, the father of dragons. I have a Glaurung video if you want to check that out in more detail, but I'll give you some highlights. So, Glaurung is still a young dragon. He's just been bred in Angband, and in the year 260, so about 200 years after the siege has begun, a young Glaurung kind of goes out, sounds like maybe against Morgoth's wishes, just kind of like, get out of my way, goes out and tries to break the siege, and temporarily does so. Wins back some ground, burns a whole bunch of area, kills a lot of folks, but eventually he is wounded and is forced to retreat back to Angband. And Morgoth realizes, all right, I gotta wait till this guy grows up, gets to a full-grown adult dragon before I, unleash him on my enemies. So, as I say, another 200 years or so go by while Glaurung is growing bigger and Morgoth is creating more and more of his army to come. 455, I've talked about this date many times in other videos, but it's the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. Partially because there's volcanoes, Thangarodrim, the mountains around Angband, there's a volcano, but there's also a fire-breathing dragon, and the elven siege is broken and then some. Like, Morgoth really hammers the elves hard, takes a lot of territory, definitely is on the ascendancy during this time. So this is 455 of the First Age. Morgoth is back in play. So now we come to perhaps the most cinematic, awesome event in Tolkien's mythology. And that is, right after the siege is broken, about a year later, it's Fingolfin, who was the High King of the Noldor Elves, decides, hell with this, I'm gonna solve this problem myself. And so he, alone, rides in to Angband, rides up to Angband's gates. No one stops him, because they're like, ooh, that guy. And King Fingolfin proceeds to knock on the gates of Angband, demanding a one-on-one fight with Morgoth. I think at first Morgoth doesn't respond, but he kind of sees like he's going to lose face with his orc army. And so I'm going to read you this line here, which is great. I mean, this is in my mind Tolkien at his best. Here's the line. So it's like, this is talking about Fingolfin. Thus he came alone to Angband's gates, and he sounded his horn and smote once more upon the brazen doors, and challenged Morgoth to come forth to single combat. And Morgoth came. Love that line. And Morgoth came. So it's like he challenges the devil to a duel, and how many times are you like, oh, the devil showed up. All right then, let's do this. So yes, there's this massive duel outside the gates of Angband. And I've actually done another video that mentions this, but these lines are just too good not to say again. So heck with it. I'm going to read you the account of this battle because it's so important for Morgoth as well. That here we go. Tolkien's description of this battle and its aftermath. Then Morgoth hurled aloft Grond, the hammer of the underworld, and swung it down like a bolt of thunder. But Fingolfin sprang aside, and Grond rent a mighty pit in the earth, whence smoke and fire darted. Many times Morgoth essayed to smite him, and each time Fingolfin leapt away as a lightning shoots from under a dark cloud. And he wounded Morgoth with 7 wounds, and 7 times Morgoth gave a cry of anguish. But at the last the king grew weary, and Morgoth bore down his shield upon him. Thrice he was crushed to his knees, and thrice arose again, and bore up his broken shield and stricken helm. But the earth was all rent and pitted about him, and he stumbled and fell backward before the feet of Morgoth, and Morgoth set his left foot upon his neck, and the weight of it was like a fallen hill. Yet, with his last desperate stroke, Fingolfin hewed the foot with Ringil, and the blood gushed forth black and smoking, and filled the pits of Grond. Thus died Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, most proud and valiant of the elven kings of old. The orcs made no boast of that duel at the gate. Neither do the elves sing of it, for their sorrow is too deep. All right, so there you go. Huge battle goes on. And remember also, Morgoth, he's the one Valar that fears death. And so if there's even, like a 1% chance he could lose and die, he's usually not going to do it. He's going to retreat. He's going to let somebody else fight for him. But in this case, he is lured out to a fight against Fingolfin. And Fingolfin gives almost as good as he gets, right? He injures him 7 times, and then an 8th time gets him on the foot, and that foot injury results in a permanent limp for Morgoth for the rest of his days. So it's a very significant injury. And although he's just killed the king of the Noldor, there's no songs. The orcs aren't going to bring it up because they realize that even though their master won that fight, he looked vulnerable. And they're not going to bring it up, and he certainly didn't either. And so that was interesting. The elves don't bring it up because it's too painful, and the orcs don't bring it up because they don't want to piss off their master. One add-on to that: so after Fingolfin is dead, Morgoth is going to take the corpse, I think, tear it to pieces. But before he can do so, it's Thorondor, that eagle from, if you remember, part 2. Thorondor aided in the rescue of the elf Maethros. It's Thorondor comes back and basically takes Fingolfin's body away and scratches Morgoth in the face, claws him in the face. So he takes like a permanent scar to the face, and he has a permanent limp as a result of this duel. So I would love to one day see that on some kind of a screen, whether it's a TV or a movie screen. Whew, love to see Fingolfin v. Morgoth. That'd be great. All right, so the next major event for Morgoth is, now of course he's got the 3 Silmarils. If you remember, he stole them. He's put them into his iron crown, and he wears them. A few years later, I think it's 10 years later, so we're now like 466 in the First Age, is when the tale of Beren and Luthien happens. I've done a video on Beren and Luthien. Again, as I mentioned, Morgoth is involved in so many of these major legends that you just can't help it. Shake a stick, there's Morgoth. Anyway, Beren and Luthien steal one of the Silmarils back from his crown. So at that point, Morgoth's got 2 Silmarils, and Beren and Luthien have 1. That's important because, if you remember, the sons of Fëanor, the elf, had made this oath that they were going to do whatever it took to get the Silmarils back. Well, now that one of the Silmarils is with the elves are now a target for the sons of Fëanor, and they have these multiple kinslayings that go on as they attempt to get those gems. The next major event in the chronology of Morgoth and his downfall is the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. So that is in 472 of the First Age. So, another 6 years after this gem is stolen from him. It's the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. The elves decide to bring the battle to Morgoth. And it's another crushing defeat for the elves. Glaurung is still in full effect, does a whole bunch of damage to the elven ranks. There's also dwarves. There's some humans involved as well. And yeah, it's a complete victory for Morgoth. During that battle, there's the human hero, Hurin. And Hurin is captured by Morgoth. I think he kills like some ungodly number of orcs, but eventually they overwhelm him, and Morgoth takes him captive. All right. Morgoth then starts torturing him to try to find out the location of the hidden elven city of Gondolin. It's hidden for a good reason, because they realize that if Morgoth were to find them, it'd be bad news. So, carefully hidden away, Hurin is aware of its whereabouts, but refuses to tell Morgoth. Doesn't break. And so what ends up happening is, it's one of the most overkill curses probably in literary history. Morgoth is, I guess, so enraged that he can't get this information from Hurin that the curse he puts on him is just terrible. All right, so Hurin is taken to the top of Thangarodrim, the mountains, stuck in a chair, chained to a chair, and is forced by Morgoth's sorcery, to watch these tragedies unfold for his family. Because Morgoth curses not only Hurin, but Hurin's entire family. So, for 28 years, Hurin, this hero, is forced to sit and watch his family suffer. And he's got his son, is Turin, the hero, who eventually, despite all these tragedies, does manage to kill Glaurung in the middle of all that, so some good happens there. But Hurin watches his son and his daughter, who don't realize they're related, fall in love. She gets pregnant, then they find out. They both commit suicide. She commits suicide while pregnant. Eventually, Morgoth releases Hurin, who's now just a broken shell of a man who's watched, this horrible curse play out for his family. He gets back to his wife just in time for her to die, essentially in his arms. Because he's so broken and he's cursed, his curse follows him through a series of other events, and eventually he ends up committing suicide as well. So it's just, honestly, I don't know of a worse, if you know of a worse curse that was ever put into literature, let me know, because I think Hurin takes the cake. It's like, man, Morgoth is a vengeful spirit for sure. And he takes out his revenge on Hurin and his family. I'll put a little note on this. It is not canon at this point, but once upon a time, early on, as Tolkien was writing his mythology, he had the idea for this Dagor, which was the final battle. His version of Ragnarok, essentially, in the Norse mythology. It's going to be a war to end all wars, and all these spirits, for good and evil, would all return, and there'd be this massive fight. And in that massive fight, at the time when he was writing this out, before he decided, ultimately, I'm not going to add this to my mythology, he was going to have Morgoth killed by Turin using his magical blade as a kind of a revenge for this curse. So Morgoth would have in Dagoroth been killed off by the family that he cursed so horribly all those years ago. Kind of maybe a fitting end, perhaps, for Morgoth. But as I say, that was ultimately not canon. Okay, so the siege has been broken. Fingolfin has been killed off. Silmaril got stolen. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears has happened. Morgoth is now searching actively for Gondolin because he wants to just destroy this elven realm once and for all. The king there is Turgon. Eventually, Morgoth captures Maeglin. I've actually done a video on his dad, Eol the Dark Elf, which mentions Maeglin prominently. Maeglin is captured, and eventually he's the one who gives up the location of Gondolin. One of the ways that Morgoth coerces Maeglin is he realizes that Maeglin is in love, is infatuated with Idril, who is currently married to Prince Tuor. So Turgon's the king, his son's Tuor, he's married to Idril. They have a kid, Eorendil. Circle that because that's important. So basically it's like, hey, this is Morgoth talking, if you, Maeglin, help me, break into the city of Gondolin, Idril is yours. Maeglin does give up the information. Predictably, Gondolin falls. There's a massive battle. Turgon, the king, is killed off. There's Balrogs. There are dragons. Although, Glaurung at this point is dead, but they do have other, at this point, still flightless dragons. They're like little personnel carriers, essentially. The winged dragons come later, but for now, there's a whole host of horrible things that hit Gondolin, take out the city. Now, this is, though, perhaps where, if you were trying to trace one moment that if Morgoth could have it back, he would change and thus save himself eventually, it would be here at the fall of Gondolin. Because what ends up happening is, Maeglin goes to find Idril and finds her and her little kid son. I think Eorendil's like 7 or something at this point, and is about to basically take them away, kidnap them. And it's Tuor, the prince, who shows up and fights Maeglin and throws him off the walls of Gondolin. I'm going to read you the passage really fast here. Here we go. Tuor sought to rescue Idril from the sack of the city, but Maeglin had laid hands on her and on Eorendil. And Tuor fought with Maeglin on the walls and cast him far out, and his body, as it fell, smote the rocky slopes of Amangwareth thrice, ere it pitched into the flames below. So a horrible demise for Maeglin, who died much like his father did. His father was cast off the walls as well. Anyway, in that quote it mentions he'd laid hands on Idril and he'd laid hands on Eorendil. But because Morgoth didn't necessarily take care of that himself and left this thing of, hey, Maeglin, if you want to kidnap the princess, so be it. Eorendil survives this little kid. Imagine the sack of the city. All these horrible things are going on. They managed to, the princess had thought ahead to have a kind of a secret exit, a tunnel that they made that they escape through. But in any case, it was touch and go, and Eorendil could have been killed off, and probably his chances of being killed off were much higher if Maeglin had this promise of, oh, you can have Idril for yourself. It's Eorendil that eventually is the downfall of Morgoth. And so this little 7-year-old kid in the middle of a city being destroyed, that kid's survival is what eventually takes down Morgoth. The way it happens is that Eorendil starts searching for Valinor. Now, it's a big no-no for mortals to go to Valinor, basically under penalty of death. But there is also a bit of prophecy when it comes to Eorendil, because the boat he ends up building, Vingalot, he is helped in that construction by Cirdan. I mentioned Cirdan he's in the Lord of the Rings. He's the elf at the Grey Havens, and he's a master shipbuilder. And Cirdan had this vision, almost like a prophecy, essentially, of this magical boat that he would one day build. And he realizes when he meets up with Eorendil that this is the person and the time that this boat was going to get built. So in some ways there is maybe something was protecting little 7-year-old Eorendil while he was hanging around in Gondolin. But in any case, gets on the boat. He is searching high and low for Valinor. Can't find it. The Sons of Fëanor, as I mentioned, are at this point killing elves. It's the third kinslaying is what they call it. They're trying to get that Silmaril back. Silmaril ends up in the hands of Eorendil's wife, Elwing. There's a whole little series of myths that happen here, but essentially she ends up on the boat with Eorendil and the Silmaril. And together, the two of them find Valinor and end up standing in front of the Valar, and they make a bid to say, you know what? Middle-earth needs you, Valar. The elves and men, the children of Iluvatar, are in desperate trouble. Morgoth is going to destroy them unless you come in and intervene. And it's this plea that is granted. It's the one time that this mortals were able to talk to the Valar in person and not just, get bamfed out of existence. And so the Valar agree that they're going to send a host to go take out Morgoth in Middle-earth. Takes a few years, but eventually the host of the Valar arrive in Middle-earth with kind of one mission, and that's to take down Morgoth. Doesn't happen right away. There's a 40 years worth of struggle that go on in what's called the War of Wrath. But eventually there is this big final battle, and it is outside the gates of Angband, and the winged dragons are brought to bear. Morgoth uses them, and they temporarily turn the tide against the host of the Valar. But Eorendil comes on his flying ship with the Silmaril, and the huge dragon, Ancalagon the Black, the largest dragon ever, is killed by Eorendil. As that dragon falls, he lands on Thangorodrim, the mountain range, and it topples the mountain range, and all is destroyed. Morgoth has finally lost in this moment. And I'm going to read you here a passage about that defeat. What's interesting here in particular is listen to Tolkien's description of how humans fared in this battle, because most of them were fighting for Morgoth, with the exception of this group called the Edain, which I've mentioned in another video. But so there was a group of humans that fought for the good guys. A whole bunch of them fought for the bad guys. So here's the description. In the great battle, when at last Morgoth was overthrown and Thangorodrim was broken, the Edain alone of the kindreds of men fought for the Valar, whereas many others fought for Morgoth. And after the victory of the lords of the west, those of the evil men who were not destroyed fled back into the east. Then the Valar forsook for a time the men of Middle-earth, who had refused their summons and had taken the friends of Morgoth to be their masters, and the lot of men was unhappy. But Manwe put forth Morgoth and shut him beyond the world in the void that is without, and he cannot himself return again into the world, while the lords of the west are still enthroned. Yet the seeds that he had planted still grew and sprouted, bearing evil fruit if any would tend them. For his will remained and guided his servants, moving them ever to thwart the will of the Valar and to destroy those that obeyed them. So you see there that bad time actually to be a human in Middle-earth. Most of humanity had been corrupted by Morgoth and were fighting on the wrong side. Really quickly here, it's also the description of what happened when Morgoth was finally caught. Morgoth's feet were hewn under him, and he was hurled upon his face. Then he was bound with the chain and Gainor which he had worn aforetime, and his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck, and his head was bowed upon his knees. So yes, that chain was the same chain that he was chained with way back when he was imprisoned for thousands of years with Mandos. They brought the chain back, used it. I like how they took his crown and turned it into a collar. And then, they cast him into the void. So he's not dead. He's just out in the void, but he's unable to return as long as the Valar are still around. And as I mentioned, once upon a time, Tolkien had the idea of Daggoroth, where he would somehow find his way out of the void. But as far as we know, it's not in the books anymore. Morgoth seems perpetually trapped in the void. So what was the legacy then of Morgoth? Well, the most obvious thing you could turn to was Sauron, right? His most devoted servant, second in command. And here's the description of what happened at the end of the War of Wrath, which ends the First Age. Sauron is actually, you'll see here, he's captured, and there's this bit where he even repents briefly, which is really shocking. I'm going to bring up the name Eonwe, and just to let you know who Eonwe is. Eonwe is known as the Herald of Manwe. He's not one of the Valar, right? He's not one of the uber powerful angels. He's on par with Sauron, right? He's kind of one of the Maiar spirits, and that plays a part in this quote. So here you go. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order. And he commanded Sauron to return to Aman and there receive the judgment of Manwe. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith. Therefore, when Eonwe departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. So this is really actually a fascinating paragraph there. So Sauron actually has this moment of regret for following Morgoth. And unfortunately, it's the punishment he gets. So Eonwe says, look, I can't bestow a punishment on you. You need to be punished by somebody at a higher level than me. So I'm ordering you to go back to Aman and get your punishment and be in prison for thousands of years. There. And I guess I'm not going to follow up. Because then, Sauron just, hides. And everything's fine. So, Eonwe, I think, kind of drops the ball there, frankly. And a whole lot of people suffer as a result. But so be it. Sometimes we make bad choices. And I'm going to put that up to Eonwe in that moment. So, obviously, Sauron carries on the legacy of Morgoth. And in fact, he uses Morgoth, the idea of praying to Morgoth to entice the Númenóreans. The idea that Morgoth, if you pray to him, he can help you conquer death. And so it's still this thought, even though Morgoth isn't physically there, it's the thought of him, this incredibly powerful spirit that Sauron uses to corrupt humanity in the Second Age. There's only one mention of Morgoth in the Lord of the Rings, and I thought I'd just bring it up just because, if you were searching for his name in the Lord of the Rings, you got one mention. And it's Legolas, and this is after Balrog has taken Gandalf down, and Legolas is talking to Galadriel, recounting what happened in Moria. And he says, "It was a Balrog of Morgoth," said Legolas. of all elf banes the most deadly, save the one who sits in the dark tower. So there you go, Balrog of Morgoth. It's just interesting who he's talking to, right? He's telling that to Galadriel. Galadriel was alive during all this time, War of the Wrath, the Battle of the Number of Tears. She has firsthand knowledge of Morgoth and his evil, so he's not just telling her something of like, oh, you know, that legend and the old ancient thing. He's like, no, you remember that guy that you knew? Yeah, well, the Balrog of Morgoth. So anyway, that's the one time that Morgoth gets brought up in name in The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to leave you with, there's two questions I had after doing all this, and actually I was surprised a little bit by some of the answers I got. One, hey, if the Valar could do this, you know, send an army over and crush Morgoth, you know, why didn't they send an army over and crush Sauron sometime during the Second or Third Age? And I think the answer comes in a few different parts. One, you know, when the Valar stepped up for the War of Wrath, they broke the world, right? Beleriand, the continent, is just destroyed, but for a few parts. So they radically changed the landscape, let's put it that way. When they did the War for the Sake of Elves, which I talked about in the previous video, they broke the world. You know, when Sauron convinces the Numenorians to invade Valinor, you know, Ilúvatar, so it's not the Valar per se, but Ilúvatar breaks the world as he, you know, crushes the Numenorians. And so I do feel like there's this sense of, if we intercede in this moment, we're going to break the world again. And perhaps they are maybe learning from their past of, like, you know, they didn't have precision strike capability, apparently. It was like they were WMDs. It was like, boom. And so the idea of remaking the world was maybe like, you know what, maybe if there's another way, let's just let it be another way. Also, I think they realized there was value in the children of Ilúvatar, elves and humans, winning a victory on their own. You know, by rising up and claiming back the land, they would then have some ownership in it and keeping it good, you know, as opposed to, oh, we'll just let Valar come in and win the battle for us, and then we can just go back to doing whatever we were doing. I think maybe there's a bit of that too, which is like, let these people have their own self-determination sorts. We'll send advisors. We'll send, you know, the Gandalf and the five Istari to advise as in the guise of elderly men, but we're not going to send an army and go, we'll do this for you. And I think also maybe, this is maybe a little controversial, but I think there's an element of this too, which is, as powerful as Sauron was, he wasn't Morgoth. I mean, Morgoth is, other than Ilúvatar, is the second most powerful spirit in Tolkien's mythology. And so there's a power disparity there. Perhaps the idea was, well, yes, Sauron is a horrible tyrant, but maybe they thought, maybe the people of Middle-earth can deal with Sauron more effectively than they could against Morgoth. So maybe those are some of the reasons why the Valar didn't send an army over at some point to wipe out Sauron. The last question that I had, that this was actually really surprising, the answer to me was, I thought, you know, okay, so the host of the Valar was primarily, you know, all these underlings, right? You got the Maiar spirits, the Istari. They were a part of this army that was sent over to take out Morgoth. Well, Gandalf, now he wasn't an old man at that point. He would have been in his spirit form and been known as Aloran. But Aloran was certainly alive at that time. If he was counted on to, you know, go to Middle-earth as a representative of the Valar thousands of years later, wouldn't he have been perhaps one of the spirits sent over to fight the War of the Wrath? I thought at first the answer was probably going to be no. But you know what? It's not clear, but I think there is evidence to suggest that Gandalf, we'll call him Gandalf, Aloran, did actually fight against Sauron and Morgoth in the War of Wrath in the First Age. So that he was there on some a version of Middle-earth before it got broken multiple times. But he would have this idea of fighting against Sauron in particular would have been known to him, I think. Which is also perhaps why there's this bit that Tolkien writes in which when Aloran is being selected to go to Middle-earth to represent, the Valar to try to thwart Sauron, Aloran tries to bow out of the task, and the reasoning he gives is, it says, Aloran declared that he was too weak for such a task, and that he feared Sauron. Then Manwe said that was all the more reason why he should go. But the idea that he fears Sauron, perhaps you could understand the idea of like, look what it took to take down Sauron and Morgoth all those years ago. It was an army. It was a huge army that came and broke the world. And now you're just going to send like 5 of us, and we're not supposed to fight. We're just supposed to advise, humanity to try to find a way to win a massive conflict. Like, I don't know that I can do this. I think I'm too weak. So I feel like perhaps that sentence and that sentiment that he's expressing would go hand in hand with someone who fought in this War of Wrath all those years ago. And the last little bit of evidence that I have that perhaps Aloran / Gandalf fought in the War of Wrath is that there is in the Peoples of Middle-earth, one of the tomes from the notes of Tolkien, he writes that Aloran, as was possible for one of the Maiar, had already visited Middle-earth. He's talking about at the time that he had shown up in the Third Age. So he'd already visited. So he'd been there once before at least, and we don't know when that was, but we know that the Valar in particular, and a lot of the spirits of Valinor stayed at home most of the time. One of the few times they were allowed to roam was this War of Wrath. So I think there's a pretty good case. I think it's probably more likely than not that Aloran fought in the War of Wrath against Morgoth and Sauron and would have had this prior experience of what that sense, that scale of fighting evil would have been. So there you go, everybody. The history of Morgoth and his legacy. Such a deep, resonant parable. I was really happy to dig into this character to really try to get the measure of Morgoth, the Dark Lord. So thanks, everybody. If you've got a topic you want me to talk about, feel free to put it in the comments. Happy to do a video about a topic of your choosing. And thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you next time.